Are you done playing dress up in your daddy's suit, or should I call the real man to come explain basic human decency to you?
The only thing you own, Mr. Langford, is a first-class ticket to contempt of court.
You can shove your contempt up your black robe, you bitter old hammer. My lawyers will have your bench for this.
It was the kind of tension you could taste. Metallic, electric, a courtroom so quiet. You could hear the rustle of a silk tie from the back row. Every person on those hard wooden benches was leaning forward, breath held. They weren't here for traffic violations or petty disputes. They were here for a spectacle. They were here to watch an empire walk in, and maybe, just maybe, to watch it fall. The bailiff's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Judith presiding. First case, Eleanor Vance versus Julian Thorne. A collective hushed gasp rippled through the gallery. Thorne. The name alone carried weight. It wasn't just a surname. It was a brand, a legacy carved into the skyline of the city itself. Thorne Global Holdings. If the city had royalty, they were it. And the man who strolled through the mahogany doors, as if he owned the very air in the room, was its arrogant prince. Julian Thorne was 30, but carried himself with the weary entitlement of a man who'd been bored by his own privilege since birth. His suit was a masterpiece of Italian tailoring, charcoal gray, so sharp it looked like it could cut glass. A platinum watch, subtle but obscenely expensive, glinted under the fluorescence as he adjusted his cufflink. He didn't walk to the defendant's table. He occupied it. His expression was one of profound, soul-deep annoyance. This was a fly to be swatted, an inconvenient smear on his otherwise spotless day. Judge Judith didn't look up from her file. The rustle of paper was deafening in the quiet. "Mr. Thorne," she began, her voice a flat, professional monotone that held no warmth, no welcome. "You are being sued by Ms. Eleanor Vance for intentional infliction of emotional distress, defamation, and the deliberate sabotage of her business. The sum claimed is $122,000. How do you plead?" Julian finally glanced up from the screen of his phone, a faint condescending smile playing on his lips. "I plead ridiculous, Your Honor." He drew the word out, savoring its syllables. "This is a frivolous waste of this court's time, but not guilty if we must use the formalities." Judge Judith's eyes, hawk-like and unblinking, lifted from the file and locked onto his. The temperature seemed to drop 5 degrees. "Put the phone away, Mr. Thorne. You are not in your corner office giving orders to an intern. You are in my courtroom, and in my courtroom, we afford the proceedings the respect they are due." Julian smiled and faltered. It simply became colder. He slipped the device into his pocket with a slow, deliberate motion. "My apologies, Judge. Force of habit. When you run a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, every second has a price tag." The insult was veiled, but it hung in the air, pungent and unmistakable. Across the wide aisle sat his accuser. Eleanor Vance, mid-40s, her blonde hair pulled into a simple, efficient ponytail. She wore a modest navy dress, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap, her knuckles were white. But her eyes were a different story. They weren't the tired eyes of a victim. They were the focused, burning eyes of a soldier who had reached her last line of defense. "This was her Alamo, Your Honor," Judge Judith continued, turning a page. "The plaintiff alleges that on the night of April 14th, you arrived at her boutique art gallery, the Velvet Canvas, with a party of associates. An argument ensued over a reserved private viewing. It is alleged that you then proceeded to make a series of inflammatory statements about Ms. Vance's professional reputation and personal character to your substantial social media following. Furthermore, she claims you contacted her primary suppliers and convinced them to terminate their contracts, citing unreliable partnership. Do you deny these allegations?" Julian leaned back, draping an arm over the back of his chair. A king holding court. "I deny the malicious intent, Your Honor. I was disappointed with the service. As a critic and a patron of the arts, I shared my honest experience. As for the suppliers," he shrugged, a gesture of effortless power, "I simply had conversations. If they chose to reevaluate their business relationships based on new information, that's the free market. It's not a crime to have influence. It's called having a reputation. A low murmur started in the gallery. Julian's lawyer, a sleek man in horn-rimmed glasses, placed a calming hand on the table, but Julian ignored it. A reputation, Judge Judith repeated, her pen poised. And what precisely did you say in your honest review? Eleanor flinched, as if struck by a memory. Julian's smirk returned, wider now. Oh, I don't recall verbatim. Something about amateurish curation and a hostess with more ambition than taste. The internet has a short memory, Judge. It was just noise. Noise that caused her bookings to cancel for 6 months. Judge Judith stated flatly, reading from the file. Noise that resulted in threatening messages to her personal accounts. Noise that, according to 3 signed affidavits from your associates that night, you specifically orchestrated to, and I quote, burn her little hobby shop to the ground. She looked up. Do your friends have poor memories as well, Mr. Thorne? For the first time, a crack appeared in Julian's polished veneer. A slight tightening around his eyes. He hadn't expected sworn statements. His friends, his sycophants, had talked. They're exaggerating, he said, his voice losing some of its smooth oiliness. It was a heated moment. I may have spoken. Loosely, Judge Judith echoed. She turned to Eleanor. Her tone shifted, not to warmth, but to a sharp, investigative clarity. Ms. Vance, tell me what happened that night. From the beginning. Eleanor took a deep, shuddering breath. When she spoke, her voice was clear, layered with a pain that was raw and recent. He booked a private viewing for a potential client. He arrived an hour late with 8 people, all of them. Loud, they'd been drinking. They handled the artwork delicate, paper-based pieces with no care. I asked them politely to respect the space. He laughed at me. She paused, steadying herself. He said, you're not an artist, sweetheart. You're a glorified waitress in a room full of wallpaper. Then he took out his phone, started filming me while I was upset, and said to his followers, watch what happens when provincial taste tries to play in the big leagues. The next day, the video was everywhere. The hashtag glorified waitress. By the end of the week, my suppliers started calling. They said they'd been advised my business was ethically unstable and a reputational risk. The only new advisor they'd all spoken to was a consultant from Thorne Global. The story lay bare. The cruelty of it settled over the courtroom. The gallery's sympathy was a palpable wave rolling toward Eleanor. Julian snorted, a derisive, ugly sound. Your Honor, this is emotional theatrics. So I was harsh. The art world is brutal. If she can't handle criticism, she's in the wrong business. And advising partners of potential risk is standard corporate due diligence. I was doing them a favor. Judge Judith's pen stopped its tapping. The silence that followed was heavier, more dangerous than before. She studied Julian, her gaze dissecting him piece by piece. A favor, she said, the word dripping with skepticism. You ruin a woman's life's work, and you call it a favor? I didn't ruin anything. Julian's composure slipped further, a flash of genuine anger breaking through. She ruined it herself by being thin-skinned and talentless. People like her fail every day. They blame everyone but themselves. People like her, Judge Judith repeated softly. Julian, mistaking her quiet tone for concession, barreled on. Yes, small-time dreamers who think passion is a substitute for skill. They clutter up the landscape. Sometimes they need to be cleared away for progress. The courtroom was deathly still. Even as lawyer had closed his eyes, a portrait of despair, Judge Judith slowly closed her file. She placed her palms flat on the bench. Mr. Thorne, look around you. This cluttered landscape is called a society. And in this society, we have rules. One of them is that you don't get to use your wealth and influence as a wrecking ball on someone else's dreams because your ego got bruised. Julian rolled his eyes, the ultimate gesture of disdain. Judge, with all due respect, you're being dramatic. This is a civil suit over some hurt feelings and a failed business. It's not that serious. My father and I donate millions to this city's arts programs every year. We are the arts community. One failed gallery is a rounding error. Asterisk, he was digging, and he was too arrogant to feel the ground crumbling beneath him. Judge Judith's face was a mask of stone. Is that so? Your philanthropy buys you the right to destroy? It buys perspective, Julian shot back, his voice rising in confidence again. He leaned forward, a predator moving in. It means we understand how the machine works. The real machine. The one that builds museums, not gift shops. He gestured dismissively toward Eleanor. You sit in this courtroom every day dealing with the small change of human conflict. I deal in the currency of empires. So let's not pretend this is some grand moral stand. It's administrative. A nuisance. And we both know, at the end of the day, the Thorne name writes checks that make nuisances disappear. Asterisk, the air was sucked from the room. The bailiff stood straighter. Eleanor stared, her hand over her mouth. Judge Judith didn't speak. She didn't move. She simply stared at him with an intensity that could have melted steel. 3 seconds. 4, 5. Julian, misreading her silence as surrender, delivered the final fatal blow. A lazy, triumphant grin spread across his face. He waved a hand, encompassing the room, the bencher. Relax, Judge. We're all part of the same ecosystem. My family funds half the legal aid in this district. We endow the chairs at the law school. I don't just own buildings in this town. His eyes locked onto hers, brimming with corrosive victory. Technically, I own the ground you're standing on. I own you. Crack. The sound wasn't the gavel. It was the sound of a man's destiny shattering. The gallery erupted in a unified, shocked gasp. The bailiff's jaw went slack. Eleanor Vance looked as if she'd just witnessed a murder, and Judge Judith? Her face went utterly, terrifyingly blank. Not with shock. With a cold, focused fury so absolute it was quieter than a whisper. The kind of fury that doesn't yell. It plans. The arrogant heir had just declared war on the one battlefield where his money was worthless. And the judge had just accepted his challenge. The silence after Julian Thorne's words wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum, a void where sound went to die. You could hear the frantic pulse in your own ears. Every eye in the courtroom was glued to Judge Judith's face, waiting for the explosion, the furious gavel strike. The order for contempt audit didn't come. Instead, she did something far more unnerving. A slow, chilling smile touched her lips. It didn't reach her eyes. It was the smile of a mathematician who has just solved for X and found the answer was annihilation. Would you mind? She said, her voice so calm it was almost a purr. Repeating that last part for the record, Mr. Thorne? The audio in here can sometimes be selective. Julian, buoyed by what he perceived as her forced composure, puffed out his chest. He was center stage and the star of his own drama. I said, this ecosystem? My family built it. The Thorne Foundation funds your legal clinics. Our donations keep the courthouse lights on. That bench you're sitting on? It's in a building my grandfather financed. He spread his hands, a benevolent conqueror. So when I say I own the ground you're standing on, I'm speaking architecturally, financially, factually. It's not an insult. It's a balance sheet. A nervous titter rippled from the gallery, quickly stifled. Judge Judith nodded slowly, as if considering a complex philosophical point. A balance sheet. I see. So your defense in this matter of deliberate sabotage and character assassination is that your family's financial contributions to the city's infrastructure render you unaccountable to its laws? That the scale of your philanthropy creates a kind of diplomatic immunity for petty cruelty? Asterisk, Julian chuckled, leaning back again. You're putting words in my mouth, Judge. I'm just saying, let's have some perspective. We're talking about a negative Yelp review versus the billions that uplift this entire community. Why are we even here? The police didn't press charges. There's no case here. This is a shakedown. He pointed a manicured finger at Eleanor. She saw a deep pocket and decided to take a swing. It's pathetic. Eleanor winced but held his gaze, her own eyes now blazing. The police, Judge Judith echoed. She opened a fresh folder, one that hadn't been on her bench before. Yes, let's talk about the police report. The one that was indeed closed due to insufficient evidence. A report I note that was initially assigned to Detective Morales, who was abruptly reassigned to a narcotics task force the following day. A task force, coincidentally, that received a $200,000 community relations grant from the Thorne Foundation that very same week. The color began to drain from Julian's face. His lawyer sat up straight, whispering urgently, but Julian waved him off. His eyes locked on the judge. That's a coincidence, Julian stated, but his voice had lost its velvety confidence. It was tighter, sharper, is it? Judge Judith asked mildly. My assistant is very thorough. She found another coincidence. The security system at the Velvet Canvas was provided by Sentinel Safety Solutions. Their contract was terminated for non-payment 2 days after the incident, and the cloud backup of that night's footage was permanently purged. Sentinel is a subsidiary of... Let me see. She made a show of checking her notes. Thorne Logistics and Infrastructure. Another coincidence, Mr. Thorne? The gallery was buzzing now. This was no longer a simple he said, she said. This was a trail, and the judge was following it with a bloodhound's nose. Julian's mask was slipping. A muscle ticked in his jaw. I don't micromanage every subsidiary, Judge. That's absurd. You don't micromanage, Judge Judith repeated, her voice dropping to a dangerous conversational tone. That you just told me you own the ecosystem? You can't have it both ways. Either you're the omnipotent architect of this city's fate, in which case the disappearance of evidence is your responsibility, or you're a clueless tourist in your own empire, in which case your testimony about balance sheets and perspective is just the pathetic rambling of a spoiled child playing with his father's money. Which is it? The verbal trap snapped shut with surgical precision. The audience gasped, then stifled laughter. They'd never heard someone talk to a Thorne like this, ever. Julian's face flushed a mottled red. The insult-spoiled child had struck bone. You can't speak to me like that, he hissed, his voice low and venomous. Oh, I can, Judge Judith replied, her own voice flat and absolute. Because the moment you swore to tell the truth in this room, you stopped being Julian Thorne, scion of an empire. You became Julian Thorne, defendant. And in my courtroom, defendants don't get to hide behind donations. They stand naked in front of the facts. Asterisk, she turned to Eleanor. Ms. Vance, you mentioned a video. The one he posted. Did you, by any chance, retain a copy? Eleanor nodded, a flicker of hope in her eyes. Not the original from his page. It was taken down too fast. But my aunt in Florida saw it. She doesn't know how to use Twitter, but she knows how to record her computer screen with her phone. She sent it to me. She handed a small USB drive to the bailiff. Julian stared at it as if it were a live scorpion. That's illegally obtained. It's not admissible. It's a publicly posted social media video recorded by a concerned family member, Judge Judith corrected, plugging it in. It's as admissible as sunshine. The monitor flickered to life. The footage was shaky, vertical, recorded from a computer screen, but it was devastatingly clear. There was Julian, phone held high, his face a grotesque mask of drunken malice. Eleanor was in the frame, tears streaking her makeup, trying to shield a painting. Julian's voice, tinny but unmistakable, rang out. This is what happens when better ambition tries to dress up as culture. Remember the name, people. The Velvet Canvas. Where the art is cheap and the owner is a desperate, talentless fraud. Let's make sure everyone knows. He then turned the camera to his laughing friends. Consider this gallery cancelled. The video ended. The silence was profound. Julian had gone from red to a sickly pale. All the air had left his sails. Judge Judith let the silence stretch, letting the ugliness of it saturate the room. Cancelled, she finally said. Not a critique, Mr. Thorne, a death sentence. Delivered not with a scalpel of criticism, but with a sledgehammer of influence. She leaned forward, her gaze pinning him to his chair. You didn't review her gallery. You organized a mob to tear it down. And then you used your family's machinery to bury the rebel. That's not business. That's a coordinated attack. Julian tried to rally. He was sweating now, a faint sheen on his forehead. It was just Social media. It's how the world works now. Asterisk, no, Judge Judith said, her voice like a judge's hammer already falling. This is how the world works. Accountability. You spent your life believing the rules were for other people. Today, you learn they're for everyone. Even you. She glanced at the clock. We'll take a 15-minute recess. I suggest you use it, Mr. Thorne, to contemplate the difference between owning property and possessing character. Because one of those things, it seems, is in critically short supply. She didn't wait for a response. She stood, her robe swirling, and exited through the door behind the bench. The finality of her exit was a verdict in itself. The gallery erupted in noise. Julian Thorne remained seated, staring blankly at the blank monitor, as the reality of his situation, the trap he'd arrogantly walked into, began to dawn on him. The Empire hadn't protected him. It had exposed him. And the judge was just getting started. Asterisk, the recess felt less like a break and more like the tense, humming stillness between the first tremor and the full-scale earthquake. The courtroom buzzed with a low, excited energy. Spectators whispered behind their hands. Journalists typed furiously on silent phones, and all eyes kept darting to the defendant's table, where Julian Thorne sat in a state of shell-shocked paralysis. His lawyer was hissing in his ear, gesticulating with sharp, frustrated motions, but Julian seemed to be looking right through him. The smirk was gone, replaced by a dazed, hunted expression. The phrase, "I own you," now echoed in the room like a curse he'd placed upon himself. When the bailiff called the court back to order, the silence that fell was charged, anticipatory. This was Act 2, and Judge Judith entered with the deliberate, unhurried pace of a surgeon returning to the operating table, knowing the difficult part was still to come. Asterisk. She took her seat, adjusted her microphone, and let her gaze sweep the room before landing, with the weight of an anvil, on Julian. Mr. Thorne, before we proceed with testimony, I have a few more questions for you. Based on the evidence we just witnessed, Julian cleared his throat, struggling to reassemble his facade. Your Honor, my client is already, his lawyer began. I'm asking Mr. Thorne. Judge Judith interrupted, not even looking at the attorney. You presented yourself as a patron, a critic. But that video showed neither critique nor patronage. It showed a performance of cruelty. Explain the discrepancy. Julian shifted in his seat. The easy arrogance was impossible to summon now. It came out as petulance. I was angry. She was rude to me and my guests. I lost my temper. It was unprofessional. Unprofessional, Judge Judith repeated, writing the word down slowly. You organized the financial strangulation of a woman's business. You unleash a digital mob on her, and you call it unprofessional. That's like calling a tornado breezy. She looked up. Let's try another word. Calculated. Was it calculated, Mr. Thorne? No, he insisted a little too quickly. It was a mistake. A heat-of-the-moment thing that got out of hand. Got out of your hand, she corrected. Because you're used to your actions having no consequences. When you throw a stone, someone else's window breaks, and your father's accountant writes a check. You've never had to stand in the rain, shivering, looking at the hole you made. She turned to Eleanor. Ms. Vance, what were the consequences? In concrete terms. Eleanor's voice was stronger now, fortified by the shift in the room's energy. Within 48 hours of that video, I received 287 hateful messages. My business Instagram was flooded with one-star reviews from fake accounts. My booked private viewings for the next quarter, 12 of them canceled. A week later, my linen supplier, my framing specialist, and my wine caterer all terminated their contracts. They cited reputational risk and third-party advisories. My revenue dropped 90%. I had to lay off my 2 employees. I am currently using my personal savings to keep the lease on an empty, silent room because if I close... Her voice broke slightly. If I close, he wins. And everything I built is just erased. The stark financial autopsy of a dream laid bare. It was no longer about hurt feelings. It was about ruined credit, sleepless nights, and the terrifying slide towards zero. Julian couldn't meet her eyes. He stared at the grain of the wooden table. I said I was sorry, he mumbled, the words sounding hollow and childish even to him. Did you? Judge Judith pounced. Show me the email, the letter, the phone record where you apologized to Ms. Vance. Show me the retraction you posted. Show me the calls you made to her suppliers to correct your advisement. Show me the check you wrote to cover her losses before you were sued. He said nothing. There was, of course, nothing to show. You're not sorry for what you did, Judge Judith stated, her voice cold and precise. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry it landed you here in a place where your name isn't a shield. It's a target. That's not remorse. That's regret. And regret is useless. She opened another file. During the recess, my clerk did some more digging. Your philanthropy, Mr. Thorne, the Thorne Foundation. It's a fascinating entity. It donates generously to arts education in schools where your company is bidding for construction contracts. It funds urban renewal projects on city blocks where you've recently acquired zoning variances. It even, she looked up, her eyes glinting, sponsors a women in business luncheon series. The irony is almost poetic. Julian's head snapped up, a flash of his old defiance returning. Are you accusing my family's charity of being illegitimate? That's slander. I'm observing a pattern, she fired back. Your generosity is never free. It's an investment. It buys goodwill. It buys access. It buys silence. You don't give to uplift. You give to control. And when someone like Miss Vance operates outside your control, when she doesn't bow, you don't compete with her. You don't outcreate her. You simply reach into your toolbox and select the right instrument to break her. In this case, it was social media, corporate influence, and cold, hard financial pressure. She let that hang, a damning indictment. You told me you own the ecosystem. I believe you. You own a predatory ecosystem, one designed to chew up and spit out anything that doesn't serve the Thorne bottom line or feed the Thorne ego. Julian was on his feet now, his chair scraping loudly. You have no right. You sit there in your cheap robes and you lecture me about ecosystems. You're a bureaucrat, a cog. My father's company pays the taxes that fund your salary. You work for me. The courtroom froze. He crossed a line from which there was no return. Judge Judith didn't rise. She didn't raise her voice. She simply went very, very still. When she spoke, each word was a chip of ice. Sit down. The power in those two words was physical. Julian, quivering with rage and humiliation, slowly sank back into a seat. Let me educate you, Mr. Thorne, since your expensive education clearly failed in this regard. I don't work for you. I work for the people of this state. I work for the idea that a powerful man and a powerless woman stand as equals before the law. That idea is what pays my salary. It's an idea your money can't touch, can't buy, and clearly can't comprehend. She leaned forward, her voice dropping into a register of deadly seriousness. You are a product of a sickness that confuses wealth with worth, influence with integrity, and power with permission. You were taught that the world is a spreadsheet and people are liabilities or assets. Ms. Vance was a liability. So you deleted her. She turned her attention fully to Eleanor. But you can't delete a human spirit. You can bankrupt it, you can terrorize it, you can try to silence it, but you can't delete it. And today, that spirit is standing up in front of you and saying, no more. And this cog, this bureaucrat, is here to ensure it's heard. Julian was beaten. The fight had drained out of him, leaving only a sullen, exposed core. What do you want? He asked, his voice hollow. It's not about what I want, Judge Judith said. It's about what justice demands. And justice demands restoration. It demands that you undo what you can and pay for what you can't. She looked at the clock. We will now hear final arguments. But first, Miss Vance, is there anything else you'd like to say directly to Mr. Thorne? Eleanor stood. She looked at Julian, not with hatred, but with a pity so profound it was more devastating than any anger. You thought you were breaking me? She said, her voice clear and steady in the silent room. But you were just showing me who you really are. A man so empty, he has to fill himself up by emptying others. You have all the money in the world, Julian. And you are the poorest person I have ever met. The words landed with the force of a prophecy. Julian looked away, his face crumbling. The empire hadn't just been challenged. Its heir had been spiritually bankrupted in front of a watching world. Judge Judith gave a single slow nod. Final arguments. Let's make them brief. The truth is already on the table. As the lawyers began to speak, the outcome was no longer in doubt. The battle was over. All that remained was the sentencing, and everyone in that room, including a shattered Julian Thorne, knew it would be merciless. The final arguments were formality, a whispered epilogue to a saga whose climax had already ripped through the room. Julian's lawyer, his voice drained of conviction, offered a limp rebuttal about context and the perils of online discourse. Eleanor's attorney, empowered by the moral high ground now towering over them, simply pointed to the video, the financial records, the pattern of coercion, and said, "The defense has shown you who he is. Believe him." Judge Judith listened, her expression inscrutable, her fingers steepled under her chin. When both sides had finished, she didn't retreat to chambers for a deliberation. She didn't need to. The deliberation had happened in real time, in the crucible of Julian's own arrogance. "Mr. Thorne," she began, placing her hands flat on the bench. "Please stand." He rose slowly, like a man ascending a scaffold. The tailored suit now seemed to hang on him, a costume that had lost its magic. "This case," Judge Judith said, her voice carrying to the back corners of the packed gallery, transcended a dispute over damages. It became a referendum on power. Your power. And its limits. She picked up a single sheet of paper, but she didn't read from it. She spoke from memory, her eyes locked on him. "You engaged in a deliberate, multi-pronged campaign to destroy Eleanor Vance's livelihood. You did so not for competitive gain, but for sport. To salve a bruised ego. You used the tools available to you, social influence, corporate leverage, financial intimidation, as weapons. Then, when confronted, you hid behind a facade of philanthropy and mocked these proceedings, believing your name was a get-out-of-jail-free card." She paused, letting the condemnation settle. "You were wrong. This courtroom is the one place where that card is declined. Every time." Julian's head was bowed. He was no longer looking at her or at Eleanor. He was staring at a spot on the floor, as if hoping it would open up. "The law provides for compensatory damages," she continued. "For the lost revenue, the broken contracts, the cost of rebuilding a reputation. I award those in full to Ms. Vance, $122,000. A murmur of approval. Eleanor closed her eyes, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. It was vindication, but it wasn't over. But money alone. Judge Judith's voice sharpened. Cannot compensate for the terror, the humiliation, the sheer violation of being targeted by an entity like yours. It cannot restore the sleep lost to anxiety or the joy stolen from a life's passion. Therefore, I am awarding punitive damages in the amount of $500,000. The gallery gasped. Julian's lawyer choked out, "Your Honor, that's excessive." It's a message." Judge Judith cut him off, her tone final. "A message to Julian Thorne and to anyone who thinks like him. Your wealth is not a license for brutality. If you use it as a weapon, the cost will be catastrophic." She wasn't done. "Furthermore, this court is issuing a permanent injunction. You, Julian Thorne, and any agents acting on your behalf are prohibited from contacting Ms. Vance, her current or future suppliers, or making any public or private statements about her or her business. A violation will result in immediate contempt charges and additional 7-figure penalties." Julian nodded weakly. A marionette with cut strings, and finally, Judge Judith said. And now she leaned forward, delivering the blow that would resonate far beyond the financial. "I am referring this entire matter, including the evidence of witness intimidation and potential obstruction of justice, related to the police report and the security footage, to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation. The civil court has spoken on liability. The criminal court may have questions about intent." That was the kill shot. Julian's head snapped up, his eyes wide with genuine, unvarnished fear. A civil judgment was a financial wound. A criminal referral was a potential prison sentence. The color drained completely from his face. The Empire could write a check for damages. It couldn't necessarily keep its heir out of a cell. Your philanthropy, Mr. Thorne, Judge Judith said, almost conversationally, might buy you fancy lawyers. It might buy you PR firms. But it cannot buy a jury's conscience. And it will not buy mine. She brought the gavel down. Crack. Judgment for the plaintiff. Court is adjourned. The sound was like the slamming of a vault door on Julian Thorne's old life. The courtroom erupted. Cameras flashed. People stood, some applauding, all talking at once. Eleanor was surrounded by her lawyer and a few supportive spectators. Weeping with relief, Julian stood frozen at the defendant's table for a long moment, his lawyer pulling urgently at his sleeve. He seemed to be in a daze, looking at the cheering gallery, at the judge who had already begun gathering her papers, at the woman whose life he tried to break, and who was now being lifted up by the verdict. As the bailiff approached to escort him out, Julian finally moved. He walked toward the exit, his steps slow and heavy. Just as he reached the gate, he stopped. He turned not toward the judge, but toward Eleanor. The noise in the room died down slightly, curious to see what he would do. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. No sound came out. The apology he'd never offered, that he was perhaps now feeling, stuck in his throat, blocked by a lifetime of never having to say the words. All he could manage was a faint, almost imperceptible nod. Not of defiance. Of defeat. Eleanor met his gaze. And after a moment, she gave a single slow nod back. Not of forgiveness. Of acknowledgement. The war was over. She had won. Judge Judith watched the exchange from the bench, her expression unreadable. Then she stood, collected her files, and turned to leave. Her work here was done. She had taken a man who claimed to own the world and reminded him that he didn't even own his own actions. She had given a voice to the voiceless and made a spectacle of accountability. As she disappeared through the door, the camera in the courtroom, the one Julian had so derided, lingered on his empty chair. It was a powerful, silent image, the seat of power vacated. The message was clear. In the arena of true justice, the only thing you truly own is the consequence of your choices. And Julian Thorne had just been presented with a very, very expensive bill. Asterisk. The gavel's echo hadn't even faded before the digital earthquake began. In the time it took Julian Thorne to be escorted from the courtroom, a storm of pixels and outrage was already brewing. The producers, sensing the tectonic shift that had just occurred, released a carefully curated clip. Not the whole case. Just the kill shot. It began with Julian's sneering face, his voice dripping with venomous certainty. Relax, Judge. I own the ground you're standing on. I own you. It held for a beat on his smirk, then cut to Judge Judith's stone-cold, terrifyingly calm face. Then the whip crack of her voice. Sit down. The clip ended with the final gavel strike and a slow zoom on Julian's utterly shattered expression as he realized the ground had just fallen out from under him. The title, he told Judge Judy he owned her. He was wrong. It went supernova. Within an hour, it was the #1 trending topic globally. Memes materialized instantly. A side-by-side of Julian's confident declaration and a picture of a toddler having a tantrum. When you realize money can't buy manners. A screenshot of Judge Judith's unblinking stare with the caption, "The moment find out met fuck around." The phrase "I own you" was repurposed into 1,000 jokes about overdue library books, unruly pets, and stubborn ketchup bottles. Asterisk. But beyond the humor, a more serious conversation erupted. News panels dissected the Thorne verdict as a cultural moment. Legal analysts praised Judge Judith's masterful dismantling of privilege. Business commentators nervously debated the line between aggressive competition and outright sabotage. And on every social media platform, thousands of Eleanors shared their own stories of being bullied by a wealthy client, of being pushed out by a powerful competitor, of being silenced by someone who held all the cards. The case became a symbol, a rare public catharsis for the powerless. Meanwhile, In the insulated, soundproofed world of Thorne Global, chaos of a different kind reigned. The board of directors, men and women whose lives were dedicated to stock prices and quarterly reports, watched in horror as the company's meticulously curated brand progressive, philanthropic, a pillar of the community, was recast in the public eye as a vehicle for a spoiled tyrant's vindictiveness. The Thorne Foundation was suddenly a punchline. Headlines blared, "Philanthropy OR Protection Racket," and "The Man Who Tried to Buy a Judge." Julian's father, Alistair Thorne, was not a man who tolerated stains on his legacy. He had built an empire from grit and calculation, and he viewed his son's very public implosion not as a personal tragedy, but as a catastrophic management failure. There was no comforting phone call, no paternal rallying of the legal troops. Instead, a terse internal memo was leaked to the press. Julian Thorne is taking an indefinite leave of absence from all operational and advisory roles at Thorne Global Holdings to focus on personal legal matters. It was a corporate decapitation. He wasn't just fired. He was erased. Asterisk, the financial hits came next. The punitive damages were a rounding error for the family fortune, but the real cost was intangible. A major European luxury brand set to anchor a new Thorne-developed plaza paused negotiations pending a review of brand alignment. The city council, facing public pressure, reopened discussions on the tax breaks for Thorne's new waterfront project. The stock price, that most sacred of metrics, began a slow, sickening slide. Julian, sequestered in his penthouse overlooking the city he supposedly owned, was besieged. Not by process servers, but by a more profound emptiness. The silence in the cavernous apartment was deafening. His friends, the laughing sycophants from the video, were conspicuously absent. His phone, once a buzzing hive of invitations and flattery, was ominously still. He was radioactive. For the first time in his life, Julian Thorne was alone with the consequences of his own character. And the reflection was unbearable. Asterisk, he paced past walls hung with million-dollar paintings, but all he could see was Eleanor Vance's pitying face. "You are the poorest person I have ever met." He turned on the enormous television, only to see his own humiliation playing on a loop on a cable news panel. He muted it, but the silence was worse. It echoed with Judge Judith's words, "You own this verdict. You own your disgrace." A week after the verdict, a plain envelope was delivered by a motorcycle courier. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of high-quality stationery. A handwritten note. It read, "Mr. Thorne, enclosed is the first installment of the restitution, as ordered by the court. I expect you will fulfill the remainder promptly. Asterisk, this is not a communication I ever wanted to make. What you did was not business. It was an act of violence. You attacked what I love. I hope for your sake that you one day have something in your life you love as much as I loved my gallery, so you might understand the depth of what you tried to take. You have your money, your name, your properties. I am rebuilding my life, brick by brick, with the pieces you left. The court gave me justice, but you will have to find your own, Eleanor Vance." Enclosed was a cashier's check for $100,000. It was a fraction of what he owed, but the note was the real weapon. It denied him even the role of a worthy adversary. He was just a vandal, a thief of joy. He stared at her precise, elegant handwriting. There was no anger in it, just a devastating, clear-eyed truth. She was rebuilding. He was just waiting. For what? He didn't know. Asterisk. The criminal referral was a specter hanging over everything. His lawyers were confident they could stall, obfuscate, and ultimately settle anything that came from the DA's office. But the process itself was a new kind of hell: interviews, document requests, the looming possibility of a grand jury. It was a grinding, mundane, and deeply humiliating machinery, utterly indifferent to his name. He was just a case number. One afternoon, utterly adrift, he did something inexplicable. He put on a baseball cap and sunglasses, a pathetic and transparent disguise, and took a car to a part of the city he hadn't visited in years. He stood across the street from the modest storefront that had once been the velvet canvas. The windows were papered over from the inside, But in the display window, taped to the paper, was a simple hand-painted sign. It read, "Reopening soon, stronger than before." He stood there for a long time, watching as a delivery van pulled up. 2 workers unloaded what looked like framing lumber and drywall. A figure came out to direct them. It was Eleanor. She wore paint-splattered jeans and a sweatshirt, her hair in a messy bun. She was pointing, smiling at the delivery men, radiating a focused, purposeful energy. She looked alive. She looked free. Julian felt a pang so acute it was physical. It wasn't desire. It was envy. She had been stripped bare, and in that stripping, she had found her core, her reason to fight. He had been cloaked in gold, and when it was torn away, he found nothing. No core, no purpose, just a hollow, expensive echo. He had told a judge he owned her. He had told a woman he owned her world. But as he slunk away from the sight of her rebuilding, he understood the final, brutal truth Judge Judith had imprinted on his soul. He didn't own anything of value. Not respect, not purpose, not a single unbought moment of genuine peace. He only owned the vast, echoing emptiness of his own making. And that was the one property no amount of Thorne money could ever renovate or sell. 6 months is a long time in the news cycle, but some stories have roots too deep to be washed away by the next scandal. The Thorne verdict had become a permanent fixture in the cultural lexicon, a modern parable. For Eleanor Vance, those months were a blur of sawdust, paint samples, and a slow, beautiful resurrection. The insurance payout and the first tranche of damages had given her a foundation. The notoriety, ironically, had given her a customer base. People didn't just want to see art. They wanted to see the gallery that had toppled a giant. She curated carefully, focusing on local, overlooked artists, turning the space into a testament to resilience. The grand reopening was a quiet, dignified event. There were no celebrities, no Thorne-funded critics. Just art, community, and a profound sense of hard-won peace. The sign in the window now reads simply, "The Velvet Canvas, Open." For Julian Thorne, the 6-month mark was a different kind of milestone. The DA's office, after a thorough review, had declined to press criminal charges. His lawyers had successfully argued a lack of direct, provable intent for obstruction, framing the security system purge and the police reassignment as unfortunate corporate oversights. Legally, he was in the clear, but the victory was ashes. The cost had been astronomical in legal fees and, more critically, in the final, irrevocable severing of his tie to the family empire. Alistair Thorne, seeing the continued drag on the company's reputation, had made the leave of absence permanent. Julian was cut off, not with the drama, but with the chilling efficiency of a boardroom vote. A trust fund ensured he wouldn't starve, but the spigot of unlimited power and influence had been shut off. He became a ghost in the city he was supposed to inherit. Spotted occasionally at obscure restaurants or leaving a therapist's office, he was a figure of pity or scorn, but never again of fear. The swagger was gone, replaced by a subdued, watchful wariness. The "I Own You" clip would still sometimes play on compilation shows. A guaranteed wince from any audience. It was on one of these shows. A late-night clip reel of Karma's greatest hits that Judge Judith saw him again. She was in her chambers, taking a rare quiet moment with a cup of tea. The clip played. There was his arrogant declaration, her icy response. She watched, her expression unchanged. A young clerk, braver than most, lingered in the doorway. Asterisk. That never gets old, does it, Judge? Seeing that guy get what was coming to him? Judge Judith took a slow sip of her tea, her eyes still on the now frozen image of Julian's defeated face on the screen. "It's not about getting old or getting even," she said, her voice measured. "It's about balance. The world tilts when people like him believe the rules are written in their favor. All I did was put the level back on the table. What he built on that uneven foundation was his own choice. And it fell. Do you think he learned anything?" The clerk asked. Judge Judith was silent for a long moment. She thought of the reports she'd seen, the quiet donation Julian had made, anonymously, to a small arts charity for underprivileged youth. Not a Thorne Foundation initiative. A personal check from an account in his own name. It wasn't redemption. It was maybe the first flicker of awareness. Learning isn't a moment, she said finally. It's a lifetime of work. He's just been handed his first real assignment. Whether he does the work is up to him. My job was just to grade the last test. And he failed, spectacularly. She turned off the monitor. The reflection of the city lights glimmered in the dark screen. The power of this bench isn't in punishing the powerful. It's in proving they are not immune. It's in showing the Eleanor Vances of the world that the system, for all its faults, has a spine. And sometimes that spine has to stand up and say no to the person who thinks they own it. The clerk nodded, understanding the weight of the lesson. The final scene of the entire saga played out not in a courtroom, but in the rain. A slow gray autumn drizzle was falling on the city. Eleanor was outside her gallery, struggling to get a large, newly delivered sculpture unwrapped from its protective plastic. The task was awkward, the plastic slick with rain. Asterisk, a figure approached from down the street, collar turned up against the damp. He stopped a few feet away, hesitant. Eleanor, sensing someone, turned. She recognized him instantly. The expensive coat was gone, replaced by a simple, dark jacket. He looked thinner, older. Julian Thorne said nothing. He just looked at the heavy, wrapped shape, then at her struggling form. Slowly, without a word, he stepped forward. He didn't look at her face. He simply took one side of the bulky object, finding a grip she hadn't. Together, in silence broken only by the patter of rain and the rustle of plastic, they maneuvered the sculpture through the gallery door and onto the marked spot on the floor dot. The task took less than a minute. When it was done, he stepped back, wiping his hands on his jeans. He finally met her eyes. There were no words of apology, no requests for forgiveness, no grand speeches. There was just a look of stark, unvarnished acknowledgement. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Eleanor studied him. She saw the ghost of the arrogant man who had tried to destroy her, and the hollowed-out shell left in his wake. She felt no triumph, just a faint, distant sadness. After a moment, she nodded back. Not in welcome, in receipt. An acknowledgement of a debt partially settled. Not in money, but in a moment of simple, physical help, without another sound. Julian turned, pulled his collar up again, and walked back out into the drizzle. Disappearing into the gray afternoon, Asterisk Eleanor locked the gallery door behind him. She turned and looked at the newly placed sculpture, its lines strong and hopeful against the white wall. She thought of the judge, of the gavel, of the long fight. She thought of the man who had just left, who had finally, perhaps, understood the weight of a thing that wasn't his. She smiled, a small private smile. Then she turned on the gallery lights, bathing the room in a warm, golden glow, and got back to work. The art, after all, was what mattered. It was what remained when the noise finally faded. And in her gallery, there was only beautiful, defiant, unknown silence.